John Thompson lived a quiet life. He was a man of the land, a rancher who had spent most of his 58 years tending to the rolling fields and cattle of his ranch in New Mexico. His life was simple, shaped by routines that had become almost sacred to him over the years. Each morning, he would rise before the sun, the cold desert air brushing against his face as he stepped outside his small wooden house. The world was still dark and calm. The only sound, the distant lowing of cows and the whisper of the wind through the sparse trees. He always took a deep breath, feeling the familiar sense of peace that came with the start of a new day. John's ranch was not large, but it was enough to keep him busy. He had inherited it from his father, who had inherited it from his own father before him. It was more than property. It was a legacy, a living memory of generations of Thompsons who had worked the land with care and pride. Every fence, every barn, every paddock had been touched by the hands of the family. John's heart ached with the thought of what he would do without it. But at the same time, he sometimes wondered what life might have been if he had chosen a different path, one where he might have stayed in a town, had neighbors, or shared laughter around a table with friends. Yet, those were just fleeting thoughts, quickly buried under the weight of duty and routine. His daughters, Emily and Sarah, were the light of his life. Emily, the older of the two, was 19, with dark brown hair that matched her father's eyes, and a determination that reminded John of himself at her age. Sarah, 2 years younger, had a softer demeanor but a spark in her smile that could brighten even the dullest days. Both girls had grown up on the ranch, learning early how to ride horses, mend fences, feed the animals, and handle the endless chores that came with life on the land. They were strong, independent, and kind, and John felt a quiet pride every time he watched them move through the ranch with confidence. Despite the busyness of ranch life, John often felt a deep loneliness. His wife had passed away 10 years earlier, leaving him to care for the girls alone. Life had gone on, as it always does, but there were moments, quiet evenings by the fire, long walks to check the cattle when the absence of his wife was almost a physical weight. He had grown accustomed to it, yet there was a subtle ache in his heart, a reminder of the warmth and companionship that had once filled his home. He loved his daughters fiercely, but he also knew they were growing older and would eventually carve out their own paths, leaving him with only the land and his memories. The ranch itself was a place of beauty and challenge. The land stretched for miles, dotted with sagebrush, tall grasses, and the occasional cluster of trees that provided shade in the summer. The sunsets were breathtaking, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple, reflecting off the distant mountains that framed the horizon. But ranch life was never easy. The work was constant, feeding and watering the animals, repairing fences, checking for illness or injury, and maintaining the buildings. John and his daughters were never idle. And yet, despite the exhaustion, there was a quiet satisfaction in the work. Each task completed was a small victory, a step toward keeping the ranch alive and thriving. John had a routine he followed almost religiously. He would rise early, feed the livestock, inspect the fences, and then sit for a few moments with a cup of strong coffee, watching the sun rise. Breakfast was simple: eggs, toast, and whatever fresh produce they had on hand. The girls would help with chores before and after school, and they all gathered for a brief lunch together, sharing stories and laughter. Evenings were for tending to the animals again, repairing anything that had broken, and preparing dinner. Afterward, John would sit on the porch, a blanket over his shoulders, and watch the stars appear one by one. It was in these moments of solitude that he reflected on life, the past, and the uncertain future. Although John kept to himself, he was not unkind. People in the small nearby town knew him as a reliable and hard-working man, someone who could always be counted on to help with a neighbor's fence or lend a hand during the busy harvest. But he was reserved, not one for idle chatter or gossip. His life had taught him the value of patience, honesty, and hard work, and he carried those lessons into every interaction. The ranch was his world, and he had learned to find contentment in its rhythms, in the sunrises and sunsets, in the sound of the wind through the trees, and in the quiet companionship of his daughters. The girls brought light and energy to the ranch in ways John never could. Emily was curious and adventurous, always asking questions about the land, the animals, and anything that caught her attention. Sarah had a gentler approach, but her laughter was infectious, and she had a way of noticing the small details that made life richer: the pattern of the clouds, the way the horses moved, the flowers growing at the edge of the fields. Together, they balanced John's quiet strength with youthful energy, reminding him that life was not just about survival, but also about connection, growth, and joy. Even in their busy routines, the Thompsons had traditions that kept their family strong. Sunday evenings were for family dinners, where they would gather around the table, share stories from the week, and enjoy a meal together. Holidays were celebrated simply but meaningfully, often with small gatherings of friends or neighbors who shared in the work of the land and the joys of life. John valued these moments, knowing that they were fleeting and precious. He had learned, over the years, that happiness often came in quiet, simple ways, in the bonds of family and the rhythm of everyday life. Despite the peace he had found in his life, John sometimes wondered what it would be like to have someone else in the house. Someone who could share in the work, the conversation, and the quiet evenings by the fire. But he pushed the thought aside, telling himself that the ranch, the land, and his daughters were enough. He had learned to be content with what he had, to find meaning in the work and in the small moments of beauty that life on the ranch offered. Yet, in the deepest parts of his heart, there remained a hope quiet, almost hidden, that life still had surprises to offer, that the world beyond the fences might bring unexpected joys. Life on the ranch continued with its familiar rhythm. Days blended into nights, seasons changed, and the land remained a steadfast companion. John, Emily, and Sarah worked hard, laughed together, and leaned on each other through challenges. The ranch was more than a home. It was a living story, shaped by love, resilience, and the passage of time. And although John's life had been one of solitude and routine, there was an underlying sense of anticipation, a feeling that perhaps, in the vast expanse of desert and sky, life had more to offer than he had imagined. And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon each evening, painting the sky with fiery colors, John would stand on the porch, looking over the land he had nurtured for decades. He felt a quiet pride, a sense of belonging, and a spark of hope that perhaps the best chapters of his life were yet to come. The ranch had given him strength, his daughters had given him purpose, and though he did not yet know it, life was preparing to surprise him in ways he could never have imagined. The summer had brought warmth to the Thompson ranch, with golden sunlight spilling over the fields and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers across the land. John Thompson had settled into his usual rhythm, waking early to tend to the animals, repairing fences, and keeping an eye on the distant mountains as the sun rose. Life felt predictable, familiar, and yet peaceful. But that summer, everything was about to change, in a way John could never have anticipated. It began one evening when Emily and Sarah returned from a short trip to a nearby town. The girls had gone to visit the market and pick up supplies, as they often did on weekends. But this time, they were not alone. Walking beside them was a young woman John had never seen before. She moved with quiet confidence, her steps steady and graceful, and there was a calm warmth about her that seemed to fill the space around her. Her long, dark hair fell loosely over her shoulders, and her deep brown eyes held a spark of curiosity and intelligence. She was Nayeli, an Apache woman, visiting the town for work and enjoying a brief break from her own life. Emily and Sarah's excitement was immediate and contagious. "Dad, this is Nayeli," Emily said, practically bouncing with energy. "We met her at the fair in town. She's staying nearby for a while, and we thought she could stay with us for a few days while she gets settled." Tang, John raised an eyebrow, pausing in the doorway where he had been watching them arrive. His first instinct was caution. He had lived most of his life quietly, without much interruption. Strangers were rare on the ranch, and he had grown accustomed to the steady rhythm of life with only his daughters around. Yet, as he looked at Nayeli, He felt a surprising sense of curiosity, even a quiet admiration. There was something honest and open in her gaze, a kind of sincerity that made it difficult to dismiss her presence. "Stay with us?" he asked, his voice steady but cautious. "For how long?" Nayeli smiled politely. "Just for a little while," she replied softly, her voice calm and gentle. "I'm only here to get my bearings and find a place nearby." "I won't be any trouble," Sarah chimed in quickly, her voice full of excitement. "She won't be trouble, Dad. She's amazing. She knows about horses, and she loves the outdoors. You'll like her. I promise." John studied Nayeli a little longer. He noticed how she glanced around the ranch with quiet interest, her eyes lingering on the horses grazing peacefully, the stacks of hay, and the fields stretching toward the horizon. There was respect in the way she observed everything, as though she could understand the effort and care required to maintain such a place. Slowly, he nodded. "All right," he said. "She can stay for a few days. But this is still my home. We have rules here, and everyone needs to follow them." Nayeli's smile widened slightly, and she inclined her head in gratitude. "Of course," she said. "I understand." The first few days were cautious. John watched from a distance as Nayeli settled into the routines of the ranch. She helped Emily and Sarah feed the animals, water the fields, and gather eggs from the chickens. She seemed at ease with the work, moving with careful confidence, and the girls were delighted. They showed her how they measured feed, guided the horses into the stalls, and repaired broken fences. Nayeli learned quickly, asking questions politely, and occasionally offering suggestions based on what she had learned from her own life and culture. John could not deny the sense of relief he felt at having an extra pair of capable hands around the ranch. Yet, he remained cautious, unsure of how he felt about this young woman living under his roof. He noticed the way Nayeli treated his daughters with respect, patience, and a gentle kindness, and gradually, his initial hesitation began to soften. He realized that she was not just competent, she was warm, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in connecting with them. As the days turned into a week, Nayeli's presence began to change the atmosphere of the ranch. Mornings were still busy with chores, but there was a new energy in the air. The girls laughed more easily, sharing stories with Nayeli about their school and life on the ranch. Nayeli, in turn, spoke of her own life, her family, and the traditions she had grown up with. She had an easy way of explaining things that made John pause and listen, fascinated by the depth of her knowledge and the richness of her experiences. One evening, after the animals were fed and the sun had dipped below the horizon, John found himself sitting on the porch with Nayeli. The air was cool and still, and the only sounds were the distant rustle of the wind and the soft calls of the evening birds. He watched her as she sipped tea from a small cup she had brought with her, noticing the calmness in her movements and the thoughtful expression in her eyes. "You've spent a lot of time outdoors," John remarked casually, breaking the comfortable silence. "Yes," Nayeli replied. "It's always been part of my life. My family taught me to respect the land, to listen to it, and learn from it. There's a lot it can teach us if we pay attention." John nodded slowly, impressed by her insight. "You understand the ranch, don't you?" he said quietly. "I think so," she said with a gentle smile. "It's a lot like home when you care for it. No matter where you are, I can see how much love has gone into this place." John felt a strange warmth at her words. For the first time in years, he felt that his life, his work, his dedication was being recognized and appreciated by someone outside his family. It was a simple thing, yet profoundly comforting. Over the next few weeks, Nayeli became more than a temporary guest. She participated in all the daily routines of the ranch, from milking the cows in the early morning to helping the girls prepare meals with fresh vegetables from their small garden. She shared knowledge about local plants, explaining which herbs could be used for healing minor injuries or for cooking. The girls eagerly learned, asking questions and absorbing every detail. John watched quietly, slowly realizing that Nayeli was not only capable and kind, but also enriching their lives in ways he hadn't expected. There were also moments of laughter and lightheartedness. Nayeli had a playful side, teasing the girls gently when they made mistakes or challenging John to a friendly competition to see who could round up the most cattle in a day. The ranch, which had always been a place of quiet routine, now hummed with a new energy. John found himself laughing more often, feeling a lightness that had been missing from his life for many years. Yet, despite the growing comfort, John remained mindful of boundaries. He was still the head of the ranch, still the one responsible for the land and the family, but as he observed Nayeli's interactions, he could not deny the sense of trust that had begun to form. She respected his authority, followed the rules, and contributed with genuine care. Slowly, he began to let go of his reservations, realizing that her presence was a gift, not a disruption. One afternoon, as they worked together repairing a fence along the far edge of the property, Nayeli shared a story about her childhood. She spoke of long walks with her family, learning about the stars, the plants, and the animals in the desert. She told them about the values her parents had instilled in her: honesty, kindness, respect, and the importance of community. John listened quietly, impressed by her wisdom and moved by the way she spoke of her family with love and reverence. The girls, Emily and Sarah, exchanged excited glances. They knew that their father was slowly opening up, that he was beginning to see the value of Nayeli's presence in their lives. It was a delicate balance, but one that felt natural, like a new season arriving after a long winter. As the sun began to set that day, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, John felt a sense of calm he hadn't experienced in years. The ranch was still his home, still the place he had poured his heart into for decades. But now it felt fuller, richer, and warmer. Nayeli's presence had brought a sense of connection that had been missing, a reminder that life could still surprise him with joy and companionship. By the end of the week, Nayeli had become part of their daily rhythm. She cooked alongside the girls, tended to the animals with care, and even helped John with tasks that required more strength or precision. The ranch, once a quiet place of routine and solitude, had become alive with energy, laughter, and learning. And though John had approached her arrival with caution, he now recognized that her presence was a blessing, a chance for his family to grow closer, to learn, and to experience life in a way they hadn't for many years. John often caught himself watching Nayeli interact with his daughters, seeing the trust and warmth that had formed between them. It reminded him of the life he had once known, the companionship he had lost, and the possibility of new beginnings. He realized that the ranch, which had always been a sanctuary for him and his family, could also become a place of shared experiences, learning, and joy. Nayeli was no longer just a visitor. She was a bridge to a world of new possibilities. And John found himself quietly grateful for the unexpected turn his summer had taken. The days on the Thompson Ranch had begun to feel different. Where once there had been quiet routine, there was now a gentle hum of life, laughter, and shared work. Nayeli had settled into the rhythm of the ranch so naturally that it was difficult to imagine it without her. She rose with the sun each morning, helping the girls feed the animals and prepare breakfast, and often joined John in his rounds of checking the fences, the water supply, and the grazing fields. John had begun to notice subtle changes in himself. He smiled more easily, he laughed more often, and he found himself appreciating small moments in ways he hadn't for years. One morning, as the first rays of sunlight spilled across the pasture, John and Nayeli worked together to mend a broken fence along the north boundary. The wind carried the soft scent of wildflowers and grass, and the distant mountains were bathed in golden light. John watched her movements carefully, noticing the grace and strength in the way she handled each task. She was patient and methodical, yet her presence brought a liveliness to the work that he could not deny. "You really know your way around animals," John said quietly, watching her lift a heavy post and set it in place. "They seem to trust you immediately." Nayeli smiled, wiping a bit of dust from her hands. "Animals can sense respect," she replied. "If you treat them kindly and understand them, they will respond in kind. It's the same with people." John paused, thinking about her words. He realized that there was truth in them. Nayeli had a way of connecting not just with the animals but with his daughters, and even with him that was gentle, patient, and thoughtful. Her presence was subtle yet powerful, a quiet force that encouraged trust, understanding, and openness. As the morning unfolded, the girls joined them, bringing breakfast for everyone. The simple meal of eggs, fresh bread, and tea was accompanied by laughter and conversation, and John felt a warmth that had been missing from his life for years. Emily and Sarah eagerly shared stories of their schoolwork, of friends, and even of small adventures in town, and Nayeli listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and sharing her own experiences. The connection between them all grew stronger with each passing day, forming a bond that was rooted in respect, kindness, and shared joy. Nayeli also introduced the girls to aspects of her Apache heritage. She taught them how to identify local herbs and plants, explaining which ones could be used for cooking and which had medicinal properties. She showed them simple techniques for weaving and crafting, sharing stories of her family and the traditions she had grown up with. Emily and Sarah were fascinated, eager to learn and absorb everything she taught. John watched quietly, impressed by the knowledge she carried and moved by the way she shared it so patiently and thoughtfully. One afternoon, as the sun dipped lower in the sky and the shadows stretched across the fields, John found himself sitting with Nayeli near the edge of the property. They were taking a short break after a long day of work, the air filled with the sounds of animals settling for the evening and the soft whisper of the wind through the trees. John noticed how comfortable he felt in her presence, how natural it was to speak openly without the usual reserve that had defined his life for so long. "You've brought a lot of life to this ranch," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I didn't realize how quiet it had become without much outside contact." Nayeli smiled, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "Sometimes we don't notice what's missing until someone shows us. Life can feel full even when it's quiet, but connection makes it richer." John nodded slowly. There was wisdom in her words, and he found himself reflecting on his past, on the years of solitude and routine, and on how his daughters had grown into strong, independent young women. Nayeli had entered their lives like a gentle breeze, bringing a subtle energy that had begun to change everything. As the weeks passed, Nayeli became a part of every aspect of ranch life. She helped John repair equipment, mend fences, and even taught the girls how to handle horses with greater confidence. She shared cooking techniques that made meals more flavorful, using herbs and vegetables from their small garden, and introduced simple remedies for minor injuries or ailments. Her knowledge and skill impressed John, but it was her attitude, the kindness, patience, and respect she showed that truly made an impact. The ranch itself seemed to respond to the change. The fields were more vibrant, the animals more lively, and even the house felt warmer. Emily and Sarah were happier than John had seen them in years, and he could feel a subtle lightness in his own heart. The presence of someone who understood the land, the animals, and the value of hard work created a new harmony in the household. It was not only the help Nayeli provided, but the way she encouraged them to see beauty and meaning in every task, no matter how small. One evening, as they all sat together for dinner, Emily asked Nayeli about her family. Nayeli spoke of her parents and siblings, sharing stories of childhood, lessons learned, and the values that had guided her life. John listened quietly, fascinated by the depth of her experiences and the calm confidence with which she spoke. There was a sense of continuity in her stories, a connection to history and tradition that resonated deeply with him. It reminded him of his own past, of his father, and the lessons he had learned on this very land. Over time, John began to open up more to Nayeli. They shared conversations after long days of work, talking about the ranch, the seasons, and even small philosophical thoughts about life. He found himself appreciating her perspective, her ability to see the world with clarity and compassion. She never imposed her ideas but shared them gently, allowing John to reflect and form his own conclusions. There was a balance in their relationship, a mutual respect that grew stronger with every interaction. One afternoon, while helping repair a section of fencing near the pasture, John asked Nayeli about her favorite part of life on the ranch so far. She paused, looking around at the land, the animals, and the girls playing in the distance. "I like how real it feels," she said thoughtfully. "There's honesty here in the work, in the land, in how people treat each other. It reminds me that life doesn't have to be complicated to be meaningful." John nodded, feeling a profound sense of agreement. He realized that he had taken this life for granted at times, absorbed in the routine and the work, without fully appreciating the depth and beauty of what he had. Nayeli had helped him see the ranch, his daughters, and his own life in a new light. Even the simplest tasks began to feel significant. Mornings feeding the animals, afternoons repairing fences, evenings preparing meals. Each activity carried a sense of purpose and connection. John noticed the way Nayeli encouraged the girls to observe, learn, and participate with care. And he marveled at her patience and understanding. She had a natural gift for teaching, guiding, and inspiring, and he was grateful for the way she had entered their lives. There were quiet moments too. Moments of reflection that John treasured. Sitting on the porch after a long day, watching the sunset paint the sky with brilliant hues, he felt a sense of calm and fulfillment. Nayeli would join him sometimes, sipping tea or simply sitting in silence, letting the beauty of the evening fill the space between words. John realized that connection did not always need to be spoken. It could be felt, shared in the simplicity of presence and mutual respect. As summer gradually began to wane, John noticed the transformation in the ranch, in his daughters, and in himself. Nayeli's influence had been gentle, but profound. The ranch felt alive in a new way, filled with laughter, learning, and shared effort. Emily and Sarah had grown more confident, more curious, and more capable, while John himself had rediscovered a sense of openness and warmth that had long been dormant. It was not just the work or the shared tasks that made the difference, but the way Nayeli had brought understanding, patience, and compassion into their lives. She had become a bridge between John's quiet past and a more connected present. There was a harmony in their interactions, a balance between independence and cooperation, tradition, and new perspective. The ranch, once simply a place of work and routine, had become a home in the truest sense, a place of shared purpose, growth, and belonging. One evening, as twilight settled over the fields and the first stars appeared in the sky, John reflected on the changes that had taken place. He realized that Nayeli had become more than a guest or helper. She had become a part of their lives, a presence that enriched every moment. The bond between them, between Nayeli and his daughters, and between himself and the land, had grown stronger. There was a sense of hope, a quiet anticipation that life could continue to surprise them in wonderful ways. John knew that the ranch would continue to be a place of work, of responsibility, and of challenges. But now, it was also a place of joy, of connection, and of shared growth. Nayeli's presence had reminded him that life was not just about surviving or maintaining routine, it was about building relationships, learning, and embracing the beauty of each day. The ranch, once a sanctuary of solitude, had become a home in every sense of the word, and John felt a gratitude that filled him more deeply than he could have imagined. The days grew shorter as summer began to fade into autumn, painting the ranch in warm golden and amber colors. John Thompson had noticed the changes in the land, the grass turning brown in patches, leaves drifting slowly from the trees, and the crispness in the early morning air. But he had also noticed a deeper change in his own life, one that had been slow and almost imperceptible until he realized how fully it had taken root. Nayeli, the young Apache woman his daughters had brought home, had become more than a helper or guest. She had become a presence that shaped the rhythms of their daily life and touched the heart of everyone on the ranch. It started with small, everyday moments. Nayeli had a way of noticing details that others often missed: a patch of herbs that needed watering, a bird nest hidden in the branches of a tree, or the softest patches of grass where the horses liked to graze. She shared these observations quietly with the girls, teaching them to be aware, to pay attention, and to care for the world around them. Emily and Sarah adored her for it, and John found himself listening more closely, thinking about the world in ways he had forgotten since childhood. There was a mindfulness in Nayeli's approach to life that John admired and slowly began to emulate. though he rarely spoke of it. One chilly morning, as the sun had just begun to rise, John and Nayeli were checking the water troughs for the cattle. Mist hovered low over the fields, giving the landscape an almost magical quality. John watched Nayeli bend gracefully to lift a bucket, her dark hair falling across her face. And he was struck by how natural and confident she was in everything she did. She looked up, noticing him staring for a moment, and gave a small smile that made him feel both awkward and unexpectedly comfortable. "You think too much sometimes," Nayeli said lightly, her voice carrying easily in the morning air. "The land will tell you what it needs if you're willing to listen." "Mummerstaff." "Mummerstaff," John chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I've spent my whole life listening. Sometimes I forget that there's more than just work to pay attention to." She tilted her head, studying him with a quiet curiosity. "Maybe it's time to notice more than just work." Then, her words lingered with him throughout the day. As he rode along the fence line, checking the posts and watching the cattle graze, he thought about how much his perspective had changed since Nayeli had arrived. Life on the ranch was still work, still hard and demanding, but it had gained a new depth, a sense of awareness, of beauty, and of shared experience. And at the center of that change was Nayeli, whose presence had brought subtle lessons into their lives without ever seeming intrusive or demanding. By mid-morning, the girls joined them, bringing laughter and energy to the fields. Emily carried a small basket of freshly picked herbs, and Sarah helped guide the horses to a safer grazing area. Nayeli guided them gently, showing how to handle the animals with care and confidence, explaining small details about their behavior and habits. John observed quietly, occasionally offering advice, but he increasingly realized that Nayeli's knowledge and understanding were not just practical, they were a bridge to something deeper, a way to see the world with curiosity, respect, and patience. Later that day, after the chores were done, Nayeli suggested a walk along a small path near the edge of the ranch that led to a quiet creek. The girls were eager to join, and John found himself agreeing, even though he normally preferred to stay close to the ranch buildings. As they walked, Nayeli spoke of the land, the plants, and the stories that had been passed down through her family. She told them about the cycles of nature, the lessons learned from observing animals, and the wisdom in paying attention to the smallest details. Emily and Sarah listened intently, asking questions and laughing when Nayeli made playful jokes or shared a funny story from her own childhood. John stayed a little behind, watching the girls and Nayeli move together with ease. He felt a quiet sense of admiration for the way she had integrated into their lives. Not through force or insistence, but through patience, kindness, and understanding. He also felt something stirring within himself, a recognition that his own heart, which had been quiet and cautious for so many years, was slowly opening. Nayeli had a way of drawing people out, of encouraging trust and connection without ever asking for it directly. As they reached the creek, the girls eagerly ran ahead to explore, skipping stones and laughing at the gentle splash of the water. John and Nayeli followed at a slower pace, their steps in rhythm with the soft murmur of the flowing water. For a moment, there was no need for words, only the quiet companionship of being together in a peaceful place. Then Nayeli spoke, her voice low and thoughtful. "Places like this have a way of teaching us things," she said. "Not everything comes from work or study. Sometimes we learn from watching, from listening, from just being present." John nodded, feeling a deep resonance with her words. He realized that in the years of solitude, he had often missed these lessons, focusing only on work, on routine, and on maintaining control of the ranch. Nayeli's arrival had shown him that life could be more than that. It could be observed, appreciated, and shared. Over the next few weeks, John and Nayeli spent more time together outside the usual chores. They repaired fences side by side, checked the water systems, and even experimented with planting new herbs in a small garden near the house. Each task carried a sense of shared purpose, a quiet understanding that their efforts were building not just a productive ranch, but a home full of care and attention. The girls watched, happy to see their father smiling and engaged in ways he had not been for years. One evening, as twilight settled over the ranch, and the sky was painted with soft pink and purple hues. John and Nayeli sat on the porch steps together, sipping tea and listening to the distant calls of birds returning to their nests. Emily and Sarah had gone inside to help with dinner, leaving them alone for a brief moment of peace. "I never thought I'd feel this connected," John admitted quietly, almost to himself. "Life has been so routine for so long. I didn't realize how much I was missing." Nayeli smiled gently, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "Connection is something we create, not something that just happens. You've worked hard all your life, John. Maybe it's time to let yourself enjoy the company around you too." Her words stirred something within him, a warmth and comfort that he had not allowed himself to feel for many years. He realized that Nayeli was not just a visitor or a helper. She was someone who had opened his heart to the possibility of joy, companionship, and understanding. The following days were filled with similar moments, shared meals, long walks, and quiet conversations that deepened their understanding of each other. Nayeli taught the girls how to care for the land in new ways, and John found himself learning alongside them. He admired her patience, her knowledge, and the gentle wisdom she carried. More importantly, he appreciated the kindness and respect she showed toward him, recognizing his experience and the hard work that had built the ranch into what it was. One afternoon, while tending to the horses, Nayeli shared a story from her childhood. She spoke of family gatherings, lessons learned from elders, and the importance of kindness and generosity. John listened, captivated not only by the story but by the way she spoke with warmth and sincerity. It reminded him of the values he had tried to instill in his daughter's: honesty, respect, and compassion, and he saw how those values were now being reinforced through Nayeli's influence. As autumn deepened, the bond between John and Nayeli grew stronger. It was not a loud or dramatic connection, but a quiet, steady understanding that passed between them in glances, gestures, and shared experiences. John found himself seeking her perspective, valuing her insight, and appreciating the calm presence she brought into his life. He realized that life had given him an unexpected gift, a chance to see the world anew, through eyes that valued both tradition and curiosity. By the time the leaves began to fall, painting the ranch in shades of gold and red, John felt a profound sense of gratitude. Nayeli had become a part of their family, not by replacing anyone or demanding attention, but by offering presence, wisdom, and kindness. Emily and Sarah were happier than ever, their laughter filling the house, and John himself felt lighter, more open, and more aware of the beauty and possibilities of life. One evening, as they all gathered around a small fire outside, Nayeli spoke softly to John. "Life can surprise us in the most unexpected ways," she said. "We just have to be willing to notice, to learn, and to allow ourselves to grow." John nodded, feeling the truth of her words in his heart. He realized that Nayeli had not only enriched the ranch and the girls' lives, but had transformed his own perspective. She had taught him patience, understanding, and the joy of quiet companionship. For the first time in many years, he felt that the future held promise not just for the ranch, but for their family, their bonds, and the life they were building together. Autumn on the Thompson Ranch had reached its peak. The trees were ablaze with red, orange, and gold leaves, and the crisp air carried the earthy scent of falling leaves and freshly turned soil. John Thompson walked through the fields one morning, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets, watching the sun rise over the distant mountains. For the first time in many years, he felt a quiet sense of contentment that went beyond the satisfaction of work or the comfort of routine. Life had changed in ways he had never imagined, and at the center of this change was Nayeli, the young Apache woman who had come into their lives weeks ago. The ranch was alive in a way it had not been for a long time. The cattle moved calmly through the pastures, the horses grazed peacefully, and the barns were tidy and organized. But it was not just the land that had changed. The house was warmer, filled with laughter, conversation, and the quiet hum of shared effort. Emily and Sarah moved through the rooms with joy, working alongside Nayeli to prepare meals, tend to the animals, and care for the household. The bond between the daughters and Nayeli had grown strong, rooted in trust, admiration, and affection. John felt a sense of pride watching them. Emily had become confident in handling the animals, and even took the lead in some of the farm work, while Sarah had grown thoughtful, attentive, and resourceful in ways John had never fully appreciated before. Nayeli's influence had been subtle but profound. She had taught the girls not only practical skills but also lessons of patience, observation, and care. They had learned to see the world through eyes that noticed both the beauty and the responsibility of life around them. One morning, John found himself working alongside Nayeli in the herb garden near the house. The early frost had kissed the leaves, and the air smelled crisp and refreshing. Nayeli showed him how to prepare a small bed for planting new herbs, explaining which ones would thrive in the winter months and how to care for them gently. John listened attentively, noting the care she took in every movement and the patience in her instructions. "You make everything look so simple," he remarked quietly, smiling. Nayeli laughed softly, shaking her head. "It's not about simplicity, John. It's about attention and respect. The land, the plants, and the animals all deserve it. If we care, they respond. That's all." John considered her words and realized how true they were. For decades, he had worked hard, often focusing on efficiency or completion. Nayeli had shown him a different approach, one of mindfulness, patience, and appreciation. He had learned that success was not only in finishing tasks but in understanding them, feeling them, and respecting the life around him. Later that day, the girls joined them with baskets of fresh eggs and vegetables. They worked together to prepare lunch, chopping vegetables, stirring pots, and seasoning dishes with herbs from the garden. The air was filled with the smells of cooking, the laughter of the girls, and the quiet conversation between John and Nayeli. It was ordinary work, yet it carried a feeling of celebration, a recognition of shared life, shared effort, and shared joy. In the afternoon, John and Nayeli took a walk across the fields to inspect the fences. The horses followed at a distance, grazing calmly as the two of them moved side by side. There was a gentle understanding between them, unspoken but deeply felt. They spoke of simple things, the weather, the changing seasons, and the well-being of the animals, but there was also a quiet acknowledgement of the bond that had formed between them. "You've changed this place," John said softly, gazing at the fields bathed in golden sunlight. "Not just the work, but everything. It feels alive in a way I haven't felt in years." Nayeli smiled, her eyes reflecting the warm colors of autumn. "It was already alive, John. You just didn't notice it fully. I just helped you see it differently. You've done all the hard work. I only added a little. Attention and care." John chuckled, feeling warmth spread through him. "Maybe, but you've done more than that. You've changed how we see life, how we see each other." The walk continued in comfortable silence, with only the sound of their footsteps and the distant calls of birds. John felt a sense of peace he hadn't realized he missed. Life on the ranch had always been hard work, but now it was also joy, connection, and understanding. Nayeli's presence had brought balance and harmony, showing him that work and care, routine and reflection, effort and gratitude could all coexist beautifully. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, John noticed something that brought him quiet satisfaction. Emily and Sarah were laughing with Nayeli, sharing stories, teasing one another, and enjoying the simple pleasure of companionship. The house was filled with warmth, light, and life, the kind of life that comes not from material wealth or grand accomplishments, but from love, trust, and shared experience. John felt a deep gratitude for what had entered their lives unexpectedly. After dinner, the three of them, John, Nayeli, and the girls, sat outside by a small fire. The sky was clear, revealing a vast tapestry of stars, each one twinkling like a tiny beacon of hope and beauty. The wind was cool but gentle, carrying the scent of wood smoke and earth. They spoke quietly, sharing thoughts about the day, the work, and the simple pleasures that made life meaningful. John felt a deep contentment in this moment, realizing that life had given him something more valuable than he had expected: companionship, connection, and the warmth of a family made fuller by love and understanding. In the following days, the ranch continued to thrive. Nayeli's knowledge and care influenced every aspect of life, from planting and harvesting to feeding the animals and managing the household. Emily and Sarah had grown confident, capable, and joyful. And John noticed the pride he felt in watching them thrive. The ranch itself seemed to reflect this newfound harmony, with the land responding to attention, care, and observation in ways that were almost magical. One morning, as John and Nayeli checked the far pasture together, he found himself speaking more openly than he had in years. "You've made this place feel like a real home," he said quietly. "Not just for the girls, but for me too. I never thought that would happen again." Nayeli smiled gently. "It's always been a home, John. You just needed someone to notice it with you." He nodded, feeling a deep sense of understanding. The past, with its solitude and hard work, had prepared him for this moment. The chance to embrace connection, trust, and warmth. Nayeli had been a guide, a companion, and a friend, helping him see the richness of life in ways he had forgotten. As the weeks passed, the bond between John and Nayeli deepened, though it remained gentle and respectful. There was an unspoken understanding, a quiet companionship built on trust, care, and mutual respect. It was not rushed or forced, but steady and enduring, like the rhythm of the ranch itself. The girls noticed the connection, and their hearts were full of joy seeing their father happy, engaged, and more alive than he had been for years. The final days of autumn brought a sense of fulfillment to the ranch. The fields were prepared for winter. The animals were healthy and cared for, and the house felt warm and vibrant. John realized that life had given him a rare gift, an opportunity to experience growth, companionship, and love in a season he had long thought would be quiet and solitary. Nayeli's presence had transformed the ranch and their lives, bringing a balance of wisdom, care, and warmth that touched every corner of their home. One evening, as the first hints of frost appeared on the grass and the sun dipped below the horizon, John stood with Nayeli on the porch. Emily and Sarah were inside, finishing their evening chores, and the ranch was calm and peaceful. John took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs, and looked at Nayeli with gratitude. "You've brought more than I could have imagined," he said softly. "The ranch, the girls, even me. Everything feels different now. Better." Nayeli smiled, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "You did all the work, John. I only helped you see what was already here. The land, the family. You've always had everything you needed. I just helped you notice it." "Known," John nodded, feeling the truth of her words. He realized that life had given him a second chance, a chance to embrace connection, love, and understanding in ways he had long thought impossible. The ranch was no longer just a place of work. It was a home full of warmth, learning, and shared joy. Nayeli had become a part of their lives in ways that could not be measured, shaping their future with her presence, kindness, and wisdom. As the stars began to fill the night sky, John felt a sense of peace unlike anything he had known before. The ranch, the girls, and Nayeli had become intertwined in a way that made every day meaningful, every task purposeful, and every moment full of quiet happiness. He realized that life, even in its simplest forms, held endless possibilities for growth, connection, and joy, if one was willing to see and embrace them. And so, the ranch continued to thrive not just in work and routine, but in love, laughter, and understanding. John Thompson, once a lonely man of the land, had discovered that family, companionship, and unexpected friendships could bring a richness to life that was more precious than he had ever imagined. With Nayeli by their side, and his daughters full of life and curiosity, the Thompson Ranch was no longer just a place of solitude. It was a home where hearts and lives had grown together, creating a future bright with hope, warmth, and endless possibilities.